Chapter 1. We, the Anti-Europeans. The Decline of Europe. The current civilization of the West is awaiting a profound transformation, without which it is destined, sooner or later, to meet its downfall. This civilization has brought about the most complete perversion of the rational order of things. It is a realm of materialism, gold, machinery, and numbers, where there is no longer any breathing space, freedom, or light. The West has lost the sense of command and obedience. It has lost the sense of contemplation and action. It has lost the sense of hierarchy, of spiritual power, of godlike men. It no longer understands nature. For Westerners, nature is no longer a living body made up of symbols, deities, and ritual gestures, a harmony, a cosmos in which man moves freely, like a kingdom within a kingdom. Instead, nature has declined into a superficiality, obscure and fateful, whose mystery profane sciences try to ignore with trivial laws and hypotheses. The West no longer knows wisdom. It does not recognize the majestic silence of those who are masters of themselves, the illuminated calm of seers, or the proud solar reality in those in whom ideas have become flesh, life, and power. Instead, it has given way to the rhetoric of philosophy and culture, to the reign of professors, journalists, and sportsmen. The formula, the program, the proclamation. It has been replaced by sentimental, religious, and humanitarian contamination, and by the breed of people who bustle about noisily and run around in a drunken exaltation of becoming and practicality, because silence and contemplation frighten them. The West no longer knows the state as a value, the empire as a synthesis of spirituality and royalty, as it shone in China, Egypt, Persia, and Rome, has been submerged by the bourgeois misery of a trust of slaves and merchants. What war is, the war valued in itself as something superior to both winning and losing, like the heroic and sacred path of spiritual realization exalted by the god Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita. Such a war is no longer understood by these formidable activists of Europe. They no longer know warriors, but only soldiers, and even a minor war has been enough to terrorize them and drive them back to the rhetoric of humanitarianism and pathos, if not, worse still, to the bombastic nationalism and showmanship of D'Annunzio. Europe has lost simplicity, lost its center, lost its life. The democratic Malay corrodes it to the core, in law, in science, even in thought. There are no leaders, beings who stand out not for violence, not for gold, not for their skill in exploiting slaves, but for their irreducible qualities of life. It is a great, lifeless body, sweating and agitated by an anxiety that no one dares to express, with gold for blood, machines, factories, and arms for flesh, and newspapers for a brain. A great body that is driven here and there by dark and unpredictable forces that relentlessly crush anyone who dares to oppose or even just try to escape the machinery. This is what Western civilization has achieved. This is the much vaunted result of the superstition of progress, beyond Roman imperialism, beyond the ancient Orient, the great ocean. The noose tightens evermore around the few who are still capable of great disgust and great rebellion. The new symbol. Are liberation and renewal still possible in this twilight world? Is there still enough strength in Europe to assume the awareness and will for such a task? Do not be deceived. Only after understanding this can one act. We must acknowledge the menacing reality of a destructive spiritual process, whose roots reach back almost to prehistoric times, whose culminating phases coincide with what contemporary people exalt as their essential values of civilization, whose influences now manifest in every realm of thought and action. This is not about compromises, not about adaptations. What is needed is the power of a new Middle Ages. A radical and profound upheaval is required, a revolt of barbaric purity, both internal and external. Philosophy, culture, everyday politics. None of this. It is not about turning away in this bed of agony. It is about finally awakening and standing up. Here and there are still men mindful of an ancient nobility, who now, as individuals, feel the discomfort that has become unbearable and are driven to reactions in various cultural domains. Before it is too late, the lines of the peak must be brought to the awareness of these scattered individuals, beyond all limits and particular interests that today erode their strength. An unrelenting action must ensure that their purest force unfolds as something invincible, ready to shatter the filthy crust of rhetoric, sentimentality, moralism, and hypocritical religiosity that has covered and humanized the West. Whoever enters the temple, even if he is a barbarian, has the undeniable duty to drive out as corrupters all those who, in civilized Europe, have monopolized the spirit, good and evil, science and the divine, and profit from it by claiming to be their heralds. In truth, all these people know is matter, and what words, fear, and superstition have layered upon matter. To all this, we must say enough, so that some men are returned to the long paths, the long danger, the long gaze, and the long silence, so that the broad wind blows again, the wind of the primordial Nordic tradition, and awakens the sleepers of the West. Anti-philosophy, anti-humanitarianism, anti-literature, anti-religion. This is the premise. Enough must be said to aestheticism and idealism. Enough to the thirst of the soul that creates a Semitic god to worship and implore. Enough to the need that binds men like beggars together in a common bond, to give them, in mutual dependence, the substance each lacks. We must go beyond, above all this, with pure forces. To these, then, will be presented a task that transcends politics, transcends social prejudice, ignores the dramatic gesture and outward resonance. A task where material power wielded over things and people is no longer of any use. In silence, through hard discipline, through self-mastery and self-overcoming, we must create with tenacious and diligent effort an elite in which the solar wisdom is revived. That virtus which cannot be spoken of, which arises from the depths of the senses and the soul, and which is testified not by arguments and books, but by creative acts. We must awaken to a renewed, spiritualized and austere sensation of the world, not as a philosophical concept, but as something that vibrates in our very blood, a sensation of the world as power, as rhythm, as a sacrificial act. This sensation will create hard, strong and active figures, beings made of strength and only strength, open to that sense of freedom and nobility, to that cosmic breath that the dead in Europe who have babbled about it have not even felt a whisper of. In contrast to profane, democratic and material science, always relative and conditioned, a slave to incomprehensible phenomena and laws, deaf to the deepest reality of man, we must awaken, within this elite, the sacred, inner, secret and creative science, the science of self-realization and self-dignification, the science that leads to the occult forces governing our organism and connects with the invisible roots of race and things themselves, and that creates dominion over these forces, so that, not as a myth, but as the most positive of realities, men will be reborn as beings no longer belonging to life, but to more than life, capable of transcendent action. Then there will be leaders, a race of leaders, invisible leaders who neither speak nor show themselves, but whose actions meet no resistance and who can do everything. Then a centre will exist again in the West, a West without a centre. It is absolutely a mistake to think that renewal can be achieved without re-establishing a hierarchy. This means placing above the lower forms, those tied to the earth, matter and humanity, a higher law, a higher right, and a superior order. These can only be confirmed through the living reality of true leaders. It is absolutely a mistake to believe that the state can be anything other than a civitas diaboli if it does not rise again as an imperium. And it is also a mistake to try to build the imperium on economic, military, industrial, or even idealist or nationalist basis. The imperium, according to the primordial conception rooted in tradition, is something transcendent, and it is realized only by those who have the strength to transcend the small life of small men, with their appetites and sentimentalities, with their petty national prides, with their values, non-values, and gods. The ancients understood this when, at the peak of their hierarchy, they revered beings whose royal nature was united with the sacred. In these beings, temporal power was infused with the spiritual authority of more than human natures, who carried a secret and invincible force of victory and fortune. They experienced every war as a holy war, something universal and disruptive that transformed and reorganized everything with the purity and inevitability of the great forces of nature. Will those who can still resist or want to resist understand this? Will they see that there is no alternative, that there is no other spirit, albeit in different forms and figures, that needs to be awakened? This understanding is crucial for their revolutions to become more than just minor events within a single nation. It is the path for these revolutions to evolve into a universal concept, a first ray of light piercing through the thick fog of the Dark Age, the Western Kali Yuga. This is the principle of true restoration, the only possible healing.